For most of you, it's good evening, but people come in here from around the world, so could be some people from the other side of the world who it's morning. But welcome, regardless. Yeah, as Dorian said, I'm Chris Deckard. I am a manager. I have my own management company with a business partner that's called Fictional Entity, meaning the company is called Fictional Entity, not my business partner. And we have been in business as a company for over 2.5 years now. I feel very proud to be able to say that because I remember, having to scramble to like, oh, we've been in business for 3 months now. We've been in business for 6 months. And just like every time you introduce yourself, you try to, introduce yourself in a slightly better way. Anyway, I've been in this industry now for about 10 years, and I wasn't always a manager. It took me a while to get to this spot. And I was someone who, I'll take you back a little bit. I was someone who, when I grew up in this small place in the middle of nowhere, my exposure to the outside world was through books and film and television. And I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be some part of making those things, but I didn't quite know how I could actually turn that into a job. What is the career that you can have to do that? So when I went to college in New York, and I learned while I was there, I did not want to be the person on camera. I also didn't want to be the person directly behind the camera. What I did really like doing was I liked working very closely with people who were creating things. I liked helping them get their material into great shape, like the videos they were producing, whatever it happened to be, and then also help them get their material seen. Like, how do we promote this? How do we make sure people are coming back to see something again? And so I knew closer, I had a better idea of what I wanted to do with something like strategy kind of based, but also with some creative and promotional aspects to it. But like, again, what's the name of that job? I had no clue. And I thought, well, hey, strategy, entertainment, business. I know a lot of people going on to law school. So wait, and I've heard of entertainment attorneys. So maybe I could be an entertainment attorney. So that's what got me to go to law school. I went to law school at Notre Dame, which is a little bit out of Chicago. And I, went in there with the idea that maybe I can come out of this and be like I said, an entertainment lawyer. But I got a little sidetracked by seeing how much money other people were making coming right out of law school, making massive amounts of money going to these giant law firms in big cities. And I thought, I've got to try this. I've got to give this a shot. So I did, and I quickly learned how much I hated it. I was working at a giant law firm in DC, like hundreds of lawyers, many firms all over the eastern part of the US. But I found myself dreading going to work every day. I found myself wanting the hours to count down as quickly as possible when I was in the office. And I didn't want to think about work when I was outside of the office. And as I'm sure all of you know, that is not a recipe for success, not a recipe for mental health, not a recipe for business success either. So I had to do some soul searching. And I asked myself, what is it that I keep getting drawn back to? Like when there are downtimes, when there are times where I can, look out and think of, what would I rather be doing? What was I daydreaming about? And it would always come back to, what are the new movies that are coming out? What are the new television shows that are coming together? What are these things? And I thought, you know what? I've got to get back to that. And luckily, it was around this time that I finally stumbled across what it is that agents and managers do. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. It was like the missing piece of the puzzle had come into place, and all these things that I had been doing up until that point made a lot more sense. So I changed all my plans. I came out to LA. I did, though, take and pass a California bar here just in case I made a huge mistake and should go back to practicing law. But I then immediately had to figure out, how do I get my foot in the door? And as I'm sure all of you know by now, it is not easy to just wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to make it in Hollywood. Nobody's there like opening doors for you and saying, hey, come on in, have our money. It doesn't work that way, right? So I had to beat the pavement to figure out where could I get a start? And the only place that I could get to hire me, a law school grad who had passed the bar, Ivy League educated, all this stuff, like the only place I could get to hire me hired me for free. And I was working for free as an intern at a very small management company. Now, to get a sense of what the change was like there, I went from having my own assistant with my own office at a law firm, making more money every day than you make every week in an entry-level job out here. And I'm working for these two managers for free as their assistant under a lot of stress, and they're working out of their guest house. So it was quite a shift, but I loved it. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. So this management company had clients at every agency around town, and I knew that if I put in the time with them, they were likely to reward me with help getting into one of these agencies, which is where I really wanted to go and get my start. So after a couple of months with them, they did do that. They got me into WME. And as I'm sure most of you know, those of you who know your agencies, WME is now the world's largest talent agency. And, but it wasn't that big when I was there. It was definitely on its way to that size, but it wasn't anywhere near the size that it is now. I went into the mailroom there. I was literally delivering mail in a suit every day to people who could care less what my name was, where I came from, where I wanted to go. I was completely disposable to them. I had to fight my way out of the mailroom and into one of their departments. I got into the talent department there, and I found myself working for top-level agents who had literally household name clients, like people you have seen on any number of television shows, in movies, people who've won Oscars, Emmys, Golden Globes, all those things. I've worked with some of all of them. And it was great, and I learned a lot. But after over 2 years there, I found a better opportunity for myself over at ICM, which is one of WME's competitors. I made the switch over there. I again worked my way up in that talent department and ultimately got my promotion. And doing that as a junior over there, I was working with actors and actresses, getting them into open roles wherever I could around town. They have a list of hundreds of clients. We have to figure out how do we get as many of them as possible into these different movies and television shows that are coming in around town. As exciting as that sounds to begin with, it is a little repetitive at times, because you find a project, you cover a project, you put people in open roles, then you move on to the next project over and over and over and over again. And that got a little repetitive for me. And I found myself wanting to do even more. I found myself being drawn more and more towards wanting to work with writers, directors, producers. And I found ways to hip pocket those people, because I couldn't officially represent them because I was in the talent department working with actors and actresses. But I always thought, well, that's kind of stupid, right? If I find great clients around town, but they just don't happen to fall under the purview of my department, yet they're making money and they're doing great things, and I'm able to move them along, doesn't it make sense to continue to build a list that's like unique to you? Well, I realized over time that if I wanted to pursue what I wanted to do to its fullest potential, I was going to have to start something of my own. So before I did that, I took every opportunity I could to work very closely with like the finance, packaging, and sales department, the motion picture and television lit departments, and the growing digital department at ICM, so that I could absorb as much content, as many contacts, and as much knowledge as I possibly could. And in mid-October of 2016, the woman who's now my business partner and I started talking about how could we start something of our own. We found a way we thought we could make it work. We started quietly signing some people while I was still at ICM. And then at the very end of 2016, I fully cut the cord with ICM, and we've been running our company full-time since the beginning of 2017. Now, in that time, we've had a lot of great early success for clients. And I would say it's early because it is, like, even though I came into this saying we've been doing this for 2.5 years, it still is only 2.5 years if you look at it like that. We've had clients on every major end-of-year list, like the Blacklist, Hit List, Blood List, Young and Hungry List. We've got numerous Page Award winners. I have clients who have released movies, who have shot, and I have one client who shot a movie that he co-wrote and directed in New Mexico earlier this year, and he's now in the middle of post-production on that. I have clients who have sold television shows. One of our clients in particular has a television show that was sold to a U.S. network out here, and a very nice big deal for her, one of the biggest deals that I've been involved in on my own so far. And we've got clients, we've got a client movie with one of the producers of Drive, Whiplash, and Nightcrawler that's premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival next month that we're very excited about. And this is one that we represent the writer, and we also represent one of the actors in the film now. And that I use, for those of you who have worked with me before, you've heard me talk about this before. I know, I apologize, but it's a good example, I think, of what we've been able to do, because this client who's now this client also has a television series, multiple episodes of a television series that's premiering tomorrow on the CW on the CW tomorrow. So, and we took this client from someone who nobody knew who she was. She had no credits to her name and was really just an unknown quantity, and have been able to do amazing things with her since then in only 2.5 years, to where she has to turn things down now, like paid opportunities, because there's just not enough time. So, and then one thing I will say too, we represent clients all around the world at this point. I have clients obviously in the US, but also clients in Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, Canada, and Ireland now. And then one of our clients is also Zimbabwean, but is based mostly in Australia. And as of just this week, or I think I figured it out, I realized it just today because there's just so much going on, I hadn't stopped to think about it. But we have 4 client premieres this week. One of them is a movie that premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival that our actor client is one of the leads in. Another is an Australian television drama series that just aired, I think, yesterday. And it aired, and she's a series regular on it, and it aired to the highest ratings of 2019 for an Australian series. We have the CW thing that I mentioned, where our client wrote the opening episode, which premieres tomorrow night, and another episode. I don't know when that other episode will come out, but it's already getting good reviews. And then also on Friday, I'm not technically allowed to say what this is, but one of our clients is playing a role on the new season of a returning Netflix show that airs, or that will drop on Friday. So you do the homework if you want, figure out what that is. But I can't say it. So I say all that because it's a lot of different things that have been going on. And I wanted you to see that I didn't just roll out of bed one day and make this happen. This was something that was a long path to get here. And so for those of you who are similarly feeling like you're on long paths to get somewhere, you can do it, because I went from not knowing what I could possibly do out here to having real things, and real things literally happening around the globe now. So let's switch away from bragging about myself, though, and talk a bit more about why we're here, okay? Because in all of these things that I've done, whether it's, when I first came out here and was trying to get my foot in the door anywhere, or, helping my clients along, building my own company, trying to sign people, in all these different situations, I've had to figure out how to pitch, I've had to pitch myself. I've had to pitch when I was at ICM and covering different projects. I would have to, like if I read a script that I was covering, I'd have to come back into one of their giant staff meetings and pitch the script to a room full of agents who, if you've ever been in a cold room, imagine being in an ice box and having to warm that up and get someone to, and get, dozens of people to pay attention to you when they'd rather be doing anything else. To pitching clients, pitching my company, pitching myself, my business partner, all these different things, and just even pitching to all of you today here, my story as to how I got here. I didn't come out here knowing how to pitch. I came out here and had to perfect it. Now, I didn't perfect it. I'm still on the pathway to doing that. Maybe I'll get there someday, but I've definitely improved from where I started. So I want to help you all figure this out. I've seen many writers that I've worked with, because I've also worked with roadmap writers for several years now. And I've helped writers like yourselves from around the globe do a number of amazing things. And I say helped because you are the ones who should be taking credit for what you've done. But I think when you get good advice and you know and can figure out how to incorporate and use that good advice, you can do great things. And I've seen people go on from, like people that I've worked with go on to, win contests and awards, go on to get signed, go on to get optioned. I've seen all these different things happen with people that I've worked with. But in doing that over and over and over again, I've also seen a lot of the same basic sorts of problems kind of raise themselves over and over and over again. And they're just like when you're learning any other skill, we all have these growing pains, right? It takes a while to figure something out. It takes a while to figure out how to ride a bike. You're going to fall a couple times before you get your balance, right? So what I want to do is help you with a number of things that I've seen, basically, like it's a number of these basics that I've seen go right or go wrong again and again and again. So some of this stuff, I'm telling you, is going to sound a little bit like, well, duh, Chris. But other things, I want to help you reframe the way you're maybe looking at pitching right now. So I think a lot of people come in here with good instincts or instincts that are headed in the right direction, but sometimes when you look at the situation incorrectly or ineffectively, you can trip yourself up when you don't need to. So that's what we're going to try to correct a little bit here. Ultimately, anything you get out of this is going to come from what you take away and incorporate yourself. And honestly, no amount of just listening to someone like me telling you to do things is gonna change anything. You actually have to put these sorts of techniques and these bits of advice to actual use if you're going to get anything out of it. So there will be times throughout this where I'm going to suggest maybe you should try doing this, or I would suggest you try doing that, or experiment with this. I encourage you to do it. You're only going to get out of this what you put into it. And if you really are taking this seriously and want these opportunities that are out here, you just got to put forth that effort. If you're expecting people are going to pay millions of dollars for a script and put thousands and thousands of man hours into getting something made, you gotta bring your A game to this. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to bring up this, these slides that we have here. Let me see if I always mess this up a little bit. So let me see here. I'm going to hit the share thing. And then I think.
Yeah, then choose the window that's got the slides in it.
Okay. Let me see if this will work. You'll tell me if it doesn't. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this coming up? Yeah, is this showing too much?
Can see it. So then maybe click present.
Present.
On the upper right.
Upper right, present.
Next to the share button? Mm-hmm.
I thought it said present, Dorian. I got very excited.
It is, because it's a gift for you.
Yes, it's a gift for all of us. Okay, let me see here. Let me see if I got this. Oh, whoa. All right, it's already clicking its way through. So Let's see here. So I told you we're going to start kind of basic here, right? We're going to start with what is the purpose of a pitch? Now, a lot of you will have different ideas as to what is the purpose of the pitch. And I realize these different color, like it's making me look pink right now. There'll be some blue slides in here that make me look blue. There we go. See that? So, yeah, let's talk. So what is the purpose of a pitch? First and foremost, we should be looking at that. I think a lot of people come into pitching trying to do too much. They put too much on their shoulders and they get kind of twisted around thinking, well, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do all of these things, and I got to impress them this way, and I have to tell them all about this stuff. You've got what? In these pitching sessions that you're going to be doing through Roadmap and pitching sessions that you're going to have in life generally, you're not going to have a lot of time. And you're not going to impress anyone if you're trying to cram too much in there. So think about it. If you've got, 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, or in some cases even a less amount of time, you're not going to be able to put a huge amount of material into that short pitch. So to kind of wipe away all of these, these kind of ideals that people have about what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, we're going to go very basic here. I'm going to tell you that the purpose of a pitch is incredibly simple. The purpose of a pitch is to get the person you're pitching to say, yes, I want to read that script. That's all it is. That's the sole purpose of doing this, is to get someone to say, yes, I want to check that script out from you. Other people will tell you, well, you got to tell them all about yourself. You got to do this, you got to do that, and this and all that. You can make someone very interested in your life story, but if you don't get them interested in your script, what have you done? You've just kind of had a nice little conversation with someone. You haven't actually moved anything forward. But if you're focusing on how do I get this person to say, yes, I want to read this script, you're going to get to where you need to go. So yeah, this is saying it a little more succinctly here, right? So get someone to buy into what you want, what it is that you're talking about, what it is you're pitching to them. You want them to say, yes, I want to read this script. And, like I said, if you're trying to do too much there, you're going to weigh down the conversation. You're going to get them focused on the wrong things. What you need to do is get them interested enough to say, ooh, I've got to take a look at this. This is something that could be very interesting to me. So this is a very basic, fundamental principle, a fundamental thing to keep in mind, no matter how it is that you ultimately shape your pitch. We've got some dogs going crazy here. I'm going to come back to this. You're going to hear me say this as a refrain over and over and over. What is the purpose of a pitch? Just remember what we're getting to. Get them to say, yes, I want to read this script. Okay, so what do we have next here? So we're going to talk a little bit about delivery of the pitch. And I might switch back and forth between some of these slides because, I want you to focus on what we're talking about here, less about splitting your attention between what's on the screen versus what we're talking about here too. So now that we know the purpose of the pitch, let's talk about delivery, okay? This is where I see people kind of, messing up a lot, right? You want to make sure ultimately that the person listening to you is comfortable, is able to pay attention to your story, the story that you're giving them, and is engaged and buying into what you're saying. Think about different times in your life when you've told a story to someone, or you've told someone about an idea or a movie that you've seen or a book that you've read, and you can tell they're hanging on your every word. They're interested in what you have to say, right? Where you can that if you stop talking, they'd be like, wait, what am I missing here? You know, you want to feel that sort of good tension there. And that's the kind of vibe that you want to create. But you can close off that vibe by doing some very basic, fundamental mistakes that I see people doing again and again. So I'm going to say you should be treating your pitch like it's performance art. Okay. And let me see here. Let me see if I can bring up this next slide here. Oops. Let's go back. Treat your pitch like it's performance art, right? You need to show me, and I mean me as if I'm the executive here, that you're pitching to. You need to show me that you can tell me a story, So don't come in and deliver your pitch in a way where you're just kind of like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm just kind of here. I'm a little too relaxed, Yeah, what do you want to know about? No? Okay. Yeah, like you have to bring some energy to this as well, You also don't want to bring that sort of overly anxious vibe where you're moving around too much, or you've got like a verbal tic or something like this, or you see how like uncomfortable something like that can be when someone's like doing this too much. I see that a lot. Now, we're all going to get nervous here, right? We're all going to get nervous when we're telling someone a story and it feels like there's high stakes to it, at least in our delivery of it. We're going to have a little bit of those nerves. But what I want you to be able to do is think about, and it's kind of given away right here on this bullet point here, treat this like you're telling a story to a friend of yours or a family member, a neighbor. Think back to like when we're talking about performance art, I'm not talking about treating your pitch like you're reading to 5-year-olds, like you're reading a storybook to 5-year-olds, where it's kind of like, I'm going to do the sing-song voice and give you and I'm going to do all the voices that are in the story. So like the bad voices are going to be like this and the good voices are going to be like this. Don't overact it. Don't script those things out way too much to where it does feel like you're reading some sort of storybook thing here. Find your own unique pitching voice, which you're going to be able to tap into if you take into account how it is that you tell stories to family and friends. Think back, I'd like all of you to think back to, a time when you've told a story to one of your neighbors or one of your coworkers, or you're coming back from work to your significant other or whatever, and you're saying to them, you'll never guess what happened to me today. And you're telling them about what's happening. And that is a sort of storyteller vibe that you want to bring to this. You want it to be in your natural, unique storytelling voice. None of you are going to have the same sort of storytelling voice that I have, same way that none of you are going to have the same exact storytelling voice as each other. It's something that's unique to you, and it's something that's going to come out through your practice. And you have practiced this before, unless you've never spoken out loud before, unless you've never told some sort of story or recounted some sort of event to someone. You have pitched a story before. You've done this. And really all of this comes back to, why should you have to tell it like you're a storyteller? Well, why should I, trust your claim that you're a storyteller if you can't tell me a story in this short amount of time? You've got this little span, this 5 to 8 minute span or whatever it is, to show me that you are enough of a storyteller to convince me that I should give you an hour or more of my time to sit down and read your script. But if you can't win me over in that little bit of time, look, my time is valuable. Everyone's time is valuable. So why should I give you a significantly large investment when you can't prove to me that you're able to do this in that short amount of time? That's why this is important. Okay, so we've talked about, purpose of pitching is to show me you can tell me a story. You should be using your unique storytelling voice. Let's talk a bit about what you don't need to do. I've touched on this a little bit, and a lot of it's going to come back to, don't feel like you have to do too much here. People will, like I said, try to cram way too much in this short amount of time. It doesn't work. You're never going to be able to pull off recounting like your entire script in a short, in a short amount of time. So what don't you need to do? Let me see here. Let's get to this next slide. I'm still a little shaky with these slides. I told you a little bit. Don't do the different voices. Don't act out the scenes of the script. We need time as an audience to kind of buy into these characters and who they are and why they're doing certain things. There's no way that in 5 to 8 minutes you're going to be able to build enough character identity with me to where I'm going to really buy into you doing voices. Another thing that you shouldn't be doing is telling us every single plot point and every single detail of the entire story. This happens a lot. And the effect of it is this. I've got a book right in front of me, so I'm going to give you a sample of this. It'll be someone saying like, in Shaker Heights, a placid progressive suburb of Cleveland, everything is planned from the layout of the winding roads to the color of the houses to the successful life of its residents will go on to lead. And no one embodies the spirit more than Elena Richardson, whose guiding principle is playing by the rules. Enter Mia Warden, an enigmatic artist and single mother who arrives. Oh, wait, sorry. I meant to tell you that the guiding principle playing by the rules, it's Elena Richardson who has that. What am I talking about? It's like you can barely follow along with what I'm talking about, yet this is something I see over and over and over in pitches, is people trying to cram every single plot detail into this short amount of time. Because look, if you've written a movie, you have a 90 to 120 page script that oftentimes people will feel like you got to cram all of that down into 5 minutes to pitch. Even if you have a 60-minute pilot or a 30-minute pilot, there's no way you're going to be able to cram every single detail into a short pitch and make it understandable and make it something that I can follow along with. So don't feel like you have to do it. Just don't. I will get to what you should be doing, but please do not do this. Another thing that I did in the example that I gave to you is, what was I doing? I was looking at it like this. Even if you're not pulling the motor mouth move, right? The motor mouth move where it's like, how do I cram all of this into a short amount of time? Even if you've got it, planned out, even if you have it planned out to where I can fit enough of this in this short amount of time and it's not going to be too much, what you shouldn't be doing is this, right? Where it's enter Mia Warren, an enigmatic artist and single mother who arrives in this idyllic bubble and with her teenage daughter, Pearl, and a disregard for the status quo that threatens to upend this carefully oriented community. What am I doing here? I'm reading a document that's off screen. I'm not telling you a story by looking at you or like engaging directly with you, okay? Please don't have a document, even if you're like, I'm exaggerating it here by putting it over here, but look, I can tell when someone's got a document right here and they're reading it off to the side. You can always tell. So please don't do it. Also, don't memorize this perfectly worded document, because that's the other thing that people will do at times. It's like, okay, Chris, if I'm not going to use this perfectly worded document off to the side because it keeps me from looking at you, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize it and I'm going to tell it to you. Well, what happens if I ask you a question in the middle of that and I throw you off balance, right? What happens if you forget a detail in the middle of that and realize that, oh no, I have to go back and redo that? These are all things that are going to call attention away from your actual story and call attention to your delivery of that story. And all of this comes like what you don't need to do and the pitching style that you should use. It's all about getting these things, these like performance related things, to kind of melt away so that the person listening pays attention to the story that you're getting to play out in their head, as opposed to, well, that person's got some salad in their teeth, right? Or they keep shaking around a lot, or they're reading a document off to the side. All of those things call attention to your performance rather than to your story, right? They're not hiring you, and I told you, we're looking for storytellers, but I'm looking to see whether you can tell a story. That doesn't mean that I'm looking to represent you or hire you to sit in front of a camera and read something to audiences. Okay? So you have to be able to make yourself melt away a little bit so that the person listening can just feel the story playing out in front of them. And we've all had this before, and you can see it in very actors who are very good at this, who are, a good actor is very good at pitching. And when an actor is delivering a fantastic monologue, either on stage or in a movie or on television, you know what that feeling is like. I hope you know what that feeling is like, watching someone and you just kind of forget for a moment where you are. You're hanging on their every word. You're paying attention to the story that they're recounting. That's the effect we want to try to achieve here. And you're going to get closer to it by not doing some of these things that kind of throw this whole process out. Also, I know everyone wants to talk about themselves. Look, I spent a good amount of time at the beginning of this talking about myself, right? So I'm not immune to that. But I highly recommend not beginning your pitch with a long kind of recitation of the awards you've won, the film festivals you almost got into, the contests you placed as a quarterfinalist. Some of those things, look, if you were like a Page Awards winner or something like that, cool. That's cool to bring up. But it's some random film festival that happens, that it's the first inauguration thing of it that no one would know about. I applaud you for getting noticed in that, but I encourage you not to bog down the short amount of pitching time you have with a recitation of those things. Because again, this is about getting people to buy into the stories that you're telling, not to buy into just you, There will be a time and place for that, but I strongly suggest, especially in verbal pitches, that you spend the majority of your time getting people into and engaged with the story that you're telling rather than the story about yourself. Does that make sense? What? I hope it makes sense. And let's see here. So yeah, because again, all of this, right? All of these things are about getting the person to say, ooh, that's an interesting story. I have to read that. That person has gotten me, this writer's gotten me interested. I want to request that script, which gets back to the purpose of this entire endeavor that we're engaging. Okay, so next, all right, so I've talked about the purpose of a pitch. I've talked about style of pitching, find your individual unique storytelling voice and use it. And I've talked about what you don't need to do, okay? And wait, real quick before moving on. One last thing there is the reason that you should be, the reason that you want to be able to engage with the person who's listening to you, and you don't want to be, calling attention to your performance or to the anxiety that you may be having or whatever it is because emotions are very contagious. And I'll come back to that concept in another way in a little bit. But emotions are contagious in the fact that if I'm watching someone, or if you're watching if I were coming into this, I was very nervous, and you could tell, and I was wringing my hands, and I was shaking all the time, and my voice was really low, and I was breathing very heavily. All those things are going to make you nervous as well to listen to me, right? And so if you're getting the person across from you nervous to listen to you, they're not going to buy into your story. It just won't happen. All right. So talking about, all those things that we've talked about, now let's talk a bit about how you should think about constructing your pitch. Every pitch, every verbal pitch especially, is going to be slightly different depending on your style of storytelling and what your strengths are, and also based on the needs of that particular story. I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all formula. So what we're going to talk about here are some basic principles that you should use to construct your pitch. And what I like to talk about or think about here is 4 elements that I think everybody is looking for. Everybody's looking for these in a movie, in a television show, in a book, in a play, in a screenplay, a pilot, whatever it may be. These are 4 things that when I'm asked to evaluate a pitch or I'm asked to evaluate a script and I'm having trouble finding, well, where do I even get started? I always look back to these 4 basic elements. And I'll tell you that I strongly believe everybody's looking for them, whether or not they realize it. Some people are a little more observant as to what they want versus others. Like, we all know those people who will say to us, I'll know it when I see it. You ask them, what are you looking for? And they're like, we're looking for something good. It's like, oh, great. Well, yeah, that helps. That helps me narrow it down. Tell me something good. Okay, great. Thank you. And then other people will be very, very specific. Like, I tend to be someone who, if you haven't noticed, I get very, very detailed and very, very specific, which can be annoying at times, I know. But I want you to have the information. So whether or not someone knows they're looking for this, they want it. And if they don't feel it, something isn't going to be right for them and they're going to pass, whether or not they can kind of identify and really address what it is. So the first of these elements is the relatable protagonist, okay? So you can call this character, you can call this your hero or heroine or protagonist, some non-gendered, like who is your lead character, right? Like, what is it that they want? Oh, wait, I want to go back a little bit here. So like, who is your relatable protagonist that this story is about? Like, who are our eyes and ears for the purpose of this movie, right? Who is that person? Notice here that I'm saying relatable protagonist. I'll come back to that in a second. So a story ultimately is not just events, okay? It's not just like this happens, then this happens, and then something else happens, and then we're watching this other thing. That's not what it is. It's not like looking down at a chessboard and just watching all these different pieces move around back and forth. In History Channel documentaries, maybe you're going to see some of that. But even a very well-made documentary is going to focus your point of view even more, especially towards a particular character who's leading us through the story. For the purposes of your pitch, even if you're telling like a perspective story in some way, I strongly encourage you to get us to focus on one relatable protagonist. Because if you only have 5 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever it is, you don't have a lot of time to get me to invest in a character. And this is another thing too, I just want to talk about this for a brief second. A lot of people will feel some friction or whatever, or displeasure when I say, like, focus it on a protagonist, on a single protagonist. Because people want to tell these big, giant, multifaceted stories and stuff. That's great. But you have to keep in mind that the way human brains work is our working memory can only hold a maximum of 7 different things in it at any one time. And if you look into, neuroscience, anything like that, for decades, that's been the result of test after test after test. And I'm saying that's the maximum. So most of us, especially when we have other things on our mind, are going to have less capacity to focus on a bunch of details. So if you're asking me to focus on 4 different characters and their 4 different goals and the different settings that each one of them is walking through and all the different plot points that are happening and the antagonist, how am I ever going to be able to keep track of all of that in 5 minutes? It's not going to happen. So focus it down. Find, when you look at your script, who is your relatable character, and importantly, why are they relatable? We experience stories best when we can see ourselves in someone, right? When we can see ourselves in the person who's telling this particular story. Not necessarily the storyteller, but the protagonist of the story, the active character who's driving the story forward, who's making choices that have consequences and effects, right? When I say, when I'm saying relatable, think of the qualities in this character that you would share as a human being with anyone, right? Like, we all experience very similar emotions, right? Unless we're like sociopaths or psychopaths and we don't feel emotions, right? We're going to experience sadness, happiness, joy, surprise, fear, terror, all these different guilt, all these different things. We all face similar challenges. We all have similar emotions. There's something that's common to the human experience, and you have to show me what that is in your character that I can buy into as a fellow human being. Even if you're telling a story about a dog, you know, like if it's like, how is Fido going to find his way home? Well, we all know what it's like to feel like when we're lost. You know, we've all had that at some point happen in our lives. How are we going to ever find our way back? Can we ever do that? It's a very human thing. Or like, even if you're telling a story about an alien or a robot, you have to tie into what is human about them. Like, in terms of like a robot, like, yeah, robots can't feel emotions, but in, what was it? What's the Pixar robot movie? The one where, I can't remember what that is for some reason. But the Pixar robot movie where there's like, you know, the robot's isolated on a planet, has nobody around him, and there's like very little dialogue for most of the movie. Yeah, Wall-E, right? So in Wall-E, it's a robot, but the robot's lonely, right? We know what it's like to feel lonely, right? So how do I buy into the emotional journey that your character is going to be going on? Show me what that is when you're pitching, when you're building your pitch. Include that in there, you know? Like this slide says, you know, think about the essential parts of the human experience and where your character and the story touches upon those things, and get us to start feeling those with your character, right? This really is the magic of storytelling, is putting us in the shoes of someone who could be completely different from us. Like I said, could be a robot, could be an alien, could be a dog, could be a flower or something like that. Could be someone who comes from a completely different socioeconomic strata, or a different culture, a different race, a different gender, whatever it is. We're all human, and we all experience things very similarly. So find those similarities and make sure that we're able to buy into that with that character. That's what's so great about movies that show us the point of view of someone who's different than us, right? Because we may think on the surface, I'm nothing like this person, but the magic of a movie is it puts us into their shoes and makes us feel what their experience is like. But it does that by latching on to commonalities that we're going to have with them no matter what, right? So focus on that when you're figuring out what sorts of elements am I pulling out of my story to deliver in my pitch. And then what I say here, notice that I'm saying we need a relatable protagonist as your first element. I didn't say we need a likable protagonist, okay? And that's, I think, a very important distinction, because a lot of people think that, or we'll get notes back from people saying, you know, I just don't think your character is likable enough. Well, I'm going to tell you, I think that's BS, right? You should not have to make your character more likable. You have to make your character more relatable. We have to feel ourselves in that character. Like if we're Like, think of great shows or great movies where the lead characters are pretty damn awful. They're awful people. They're not people we would admire. They're not people that we would look up to. But why do we follow them? And why do we come to care for them? We come to care for them because we start to share their goal in their situation, because we have bought into their common human experience that we share with them, right? Walter White in Breaking Bad does some pretty awful things, and is not that great a person when you get down to it, no matter what he thinks about himself. Same thing with Tony Soprano. Or, you could say that about Dexter, and Michael C. Hall's Dexter. I could go on and on with different shows where we have unlikable protagonists, but they're relatable and we buy into them. I will say this, though. For those of you who are writing female characters, you are going to face a double standard here. It's not fair, and I like to think that I don't buy into this double standard, but who knows? But you will run into it. You're going to run into the fact that you could have a male character doing all sorts of terrible things, but the minute you flip that gender over into a female character, they can be doing the exact same things, but it's going to be a little more difficult for people to relate to them. And the crazy thing is, it's not just men who are reacting like this to female characters. I have seen women responding to characters in that way too. I don't know what it is. I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary, but it is a phenomenon that's out there. So what does that mean? Does that mean we stop writing unlikable female protagonists? No, I don't think so at all. I think what it is it just makes it more incumbent upon you as a writer to emphasize why that character is relatable. Okay? Like, just it's about upping that relatability quotient, not about softening their edges. Because I think, men, women, or, people of multiple genders or no gender or whatever, we're all human and we all share a common experience. And that's what storytelling is about. Okay? So enough on that. First element, what's your relatable protagonist? Okay? Next element here is going to be your immersive setting. Okay? So you've got this relatable protagonist. What is the world that they're in, right? Where does your story take place? What surrounds this character? I'm saying immersive setting because what you need to do here is you need to make it feel like this setting is real. This setting has consequences that, if you're writing a science fiction or, magical, like there's magic in your world or whatever, that there are logical consequences to certain changes or to the way things have changed from our normal, ordinary world that we live in, right? So an immersive setting can be anything. It can be deep into the past. It can be far into the future. It can, like I said, be something magical. It can be something horrifying. It can be an alternate universe. It can even be this, this very beige world that all of us live in right here, and I see this over and over again. And it's no judgment on anybody, but we all seem to have beige walls for some reason. So even if you're writing something in a world that is, just this normal thing that we all roll out of bed to every single day, it has to feel real. It has to feel immersive. It has to feel like it's something there, right? So like I said, this setting can vary. It can be mundane. It has to feel that it's real, that it has consequences. When your world, for some reason, doesn't feel real, or something happens in it and there doesn't seem to be some sort of like equal opposite reaction to it that would be somewhat logical, like when that logic doesn't track, it's going to bring up the logic police in the minds of the people who are listening to your pitch. Like those lights are going to start flashing and they're going to start thinking about, well, wait, if that were to happen, then why would this happen? Why wouldn't this go this way? And by the time they're off on that train, you've lost their attention. I realize this is one of the more difficult things to kind of put into a very short pitch. It's also one of the more difficult things to put into a log line. And like I do think that all 4 of these elements in some way should be in or be hinted at in your log line. And this can be a little difficult. But some grounding of like, where does this story take place should be present in your pitch. You know, because if you're going to tell me all about some sort of like buddy comedy that you have, and then I ask you what it's about a little bit more in my questions after I'm interested in it, and then it becomes clear in my questions that, oh, wait, this takes place in another galaxy on a spaceship. Well, why didn't you say that to begin with? Like, why didn't you bring that up? You know, like set the scene there so we know where this is taking place, okay? So yeah, first element, your relatable protagonist. Second element, what is your immersive setting? Let's go off to the third element. The third element is the element that most people think of when I say pitch your story to me. And that's the surface level plot. That's what I'll call the surface level plot here, right? Like, what is it? What has to happen for this story to be over, right? What is it that the character is trying to accomplish? You know, what is the problem that needs to be solved? The conflict that needs some sort of resolution for this story to end. You know, that should be the thing that's driving your story forward. Like if we look at something like, I don't know, let's look at the movie Taken, right? Because it's very simple plot. The movie Taken, right? Guy's daughter gets taken from him. He's got to go get her back. The movie doesn't end until he gets her back, or he doesn't get her back, like because he dies or she dies, right? So it's very clear what the plot is there. Very simple. Same sort of thing like in Star Wars, right? What's the basic surface level plot of Star Wars? We got to save the princess. We gotta destroy the Death Star. That's it. The movie's over when those things happen. It's very clear, and it's very clear from early on in the movie what this is all driving towards. Wizard of Oz. Once we get Dorothy to Oz, how do I get back home? The entire movie from that point on, how do I get back home? That's all it's about. That's the plot. That's the problem that needs to be solved. That is the surface level plot, okay? We need to know what this is in order to feel tension, like narrative tension, that's going to move the story forward. And if I don't feel what that is when I'm hearing a pitch, like something fundamental is missing here, right? Like if I told you a story that just like went nowhere and I was like, well, what could possibly make this story end? It's not an effective story, right? So let's see here. Like I said, this is what most people think of when they think about how to pitch something. Most people will just give us this and not give us enough of these other 3 elements, right? Like I said, ultimately, what is the goal the protagonist is trying to achieve? And what has to be achieved in order for this story to end, or like this says, to conclude? You know, what is the problem that needs a solution? What is the conflict that needs to be resolved? And when I say conflict, think of conflict as frustration or problem. Conflict does not have to mean bombs exploding or people yelling at each other. It doesn't have to be something super heightened. It can be something a bit more mundane, you know? It can be something like that has to do with love or a relationship. Like a lot of buddy comedies are based on this, how do we... The problem in a lot of buddy comedies is at some point the characters move apart from each other and we have to get them back together somehow, right? So that's the problem that's created. How do we get them back together? On a very basic, fundamental level. What needs to be solved for us to be able to say, okay, that's over, that's done. That's going to give us tension that we're going to feel us pulling forward. And when you do ultimately resolve it in your story, it's going to feel immensely satisfying, because all that tension that you've been able to build up with the conflict, the problem that needs a solution, once it's solved, oh, that feels great. Think about it similar to when you're telling a joke, right? or let me see here. Let me see if I may be, no, I'm not going to give the joke thing yet. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. So that's a third element to focus on. We have the strong relatable protagonist, the immersive setting, and then we have the strong surface level plot. So what is the fourth element? Fourth element is something that is most often left out of pitches. It's something that's most often left out of screenplays. Usually not things that are actually produced, although I do see this happening in movies that get out there, and I'm wondering how did these things get made? And you see in the reviews for these movies and the box office numbers and the ratings that audiences are picking up on that as well, that something's missing here, and so they're not doing well. This fourth element is the thing that ties everything else together, okay? So your relatable protagonist who is moving through this immersive setting to solve the problem of the plot, how do they change by the end of this story? How does this experience that they're going through change them from the person they were in the beginning to someone who's a little more whole, a little more complete by the end? This, a lot of people refer to as like the character arc or the internal growth of the character. I said like the surface level plot arc. This is like the character arc that should be infused within that plot arc, because every event that's happening in the story should be testing your character a little bit more. I don't need just like I don't need every detail of your plot, I don't need every single detail of your character arc and growth, but I need to sense that it's there. I need to sense that something there is going to give us that sort of fulfilling kind of feeling, right? If it's not there, I'm not going to request your script. So I'd like you to all think back to a movie that you've seen, right? One of your favorite movies, right? Something that the first time you saw it, once it was done, you looked at the world a little bit differently, even if it was just for a little bit, right? And you wanted to go see it again. You wanted to tell other people to see it. I strongly think that the reason you feel that way is because the story had a strong character arc to it, right? Because what happens when you relate to a character and you feel themselves, or you feel yourself in them going through this setting and solving this problem, and you feel them change, a part of you, even temporarily, changes with it. And it's a very good feeling to have. If you haven't felt that with a movie, I feel very sorry for you, because it's something that's, I think, fundamental to the experience and like why we do this and what we get out of going to these, to watch these things anyway. This, I also think, is what, it's what people call elevated. When I'm sure a number of you who've gotten feedback from people before have gotten this, what I think is a little bit of a nonsense kind of note is, oh, it didn't feel elevated enough. And like, well, okay, great. Well, what the hell does that mean? What does elevated mean? Like, it's no better of a note than someone saying, it needs to be better, right? You just need to make it better. It's a fancier way to say making it better. But I think what a lot of people are really getting at when they say, I want it to feel elevated, is I want this character arc to resonate. I want a character arc to resonate through this movie and make me feel like I've changed as a result of watching it. That's the feeling of like a movie working on all four of these levels. And it's like this slide says, it is the thing that's going to set your story apart. It's the thing that's going to make you stand out amongst all these other stories that just kind of give us a situation or take us through some sort of mundane kind of surface level plot. This is the thing that makes people remember your story long after they've seen it, long after they've heard you pitch it. This is the kind of thing that's going to stick in my mind. If I've heard someone deliver on all four of these elements, that relatable protagonist, this strong surface level, or the immersive setting, the strong surface level plot, and then this character arc, I'm probably going to request this script, right? If I can feel all those things and those things resonate with me, I feel like this writer knows what they're doing. You know, it gives me hope that this writer's delivering on what I'm hoping to get out of any script that I'm going to sit down and invest my time into, you know? But I will tell you, if I hear a pitch that is missing one of these elements, I'm probably not going to request your script. I know that because I know specifically to look for these things and I'll feel them. But like I said, even people who don't know that this is what they're looking for, something's not going to feel right if they're not getting one of these elements, and they're not going to request your script, which is, as we've said, it's the entire purpose of delivering a pitch. So next, I want to share with you a couple of, because we've talked about using your storytelling voice. We've talked about what not to do. We've talked about the 4 elements that you should use to kind of pull out of your script and use to start structuring your verbal pitch. Now I want to talk to you about a couple of techniques that you can use when you're further building out your pitch beyond just the like the structure of it. So first, we're going to talk about emotions and the importance of creating emotions. A well-told story is going to engage my emotions. It's going to make me feel something, right? Like I can say engage my emotions or use some very technical verbiage, but make me feel something is really the simple way to say it, you know? If I'm listening to a pitch that doesn't make me feel anything or just makes me feel anxious or bored, I'm not gonna request it. But if you can make me feel in your 5 minutes or your 8 minutes the prime emotions that animate your script, I'm probably going to be drawn in, and I'm probably going to want to request it. So think about it. If you're giving us a horror script, like let's say you're pitching a horror story, and you don't make me feel frightened or on the edge of my seat or in suspense, why would I be convinced that you're a storyteller? Why would I be convinced that I should give you hours or more of my time to do this, or to go and invest in the rest of your story? So if it's a comedy, right, you should make me laugh. I've been in situations where, someone has given me a pitch that, it felt like a drama all the way through. And when I asked them afterwards, well, this is very interesting. It seems very unusual, a different story. I've never heard a story quite like this before. And they will say, oh, well, it's kind of in the vein of like Dumb and Dumber, or, or The Long Shot, or some big broad comedy. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You did nothing to attempt to make me to laugh during this pitch. And there were no jokes in this pitch. And you're pitching a comedy? That doesn't make any sense, The thing to remember here is that, wait a minute, sorry. I'm still so not used to using this slide thing. Maybe I need to practice that a little bit more. If you can't make me feel emotions in this, there's no hint that I'm gonna connect with the actual script itself. So take the time to pull out, if it's a romantic story, some sort of drama, something that should make me cry, pull out different situations from your story to deliver in your pitch that's going to deliver that emotion to me. That's going to make me cry in some way. That's going to make me feel that meet cute of the rom-com, or whatever it may be, And yeah, ultimately, if you can't create these emotions in this short amount of time, you haven't convinced me. You haven't got me to say, you're a storyteller. This story's interesting. I want to read your script. So next, let's see here. The next thing I want to talk about is this concept of hooking us and pulling us through your pitch, right? So this is kind of like, I guess this is ultimately built on like a fishing metaphor. I'm not a person who does a lot of fishing, but you know, I definitely have like fished when I was a kid. When you want to hook someone and you want to reel them in. You want to hook them with your bait, whatever it is that's going to get them wriggling on the end of that hook, and then you want to draw them all the way through the rest of your pitch, right? So how do we do that? What are we trying to do here? This is ultimately, how do we get someone hanging on our every word, okay? And the way we do this is we think about pitching the same way we think about the structure of a joke, okay? And the feeling that you get when you're listening to a joke before you've reached the punchline, right? When you know someone is telling you a joke, not just like making a funny quip or something like that, but like telling you a story that you know is going to end with some sort of punchline, that feeling of you know something's coming, but you don't quite know how it's going to come. You don't quite know how it's going to surprise you, and that tension is building up more and more. That person has hooked you, and they're pulling you through until they get to the point of the punchline. That's what they've done. And so the way to do that is, remember back when we were talking about the conflict that needs a resolution? That's the basis of the surface level plot. You know, the conflict that needs a resolution, the problem that needs to be solved. You introduce us as early as possible to what that problem is. You know, you have our character that we're being introduced to and being asked to relate to, whatever setting that they're in, but then as quickly as possible, you want to find a way to get us into the inciting incident or the hook of your story, the thing that throws everything out of balance, you know, the thing that feels like our protagonist has to figure out how to get this thing taken care of. That's going to hook us, and then the desire to see that problem solved is what's going to get us through the rest of that story, right? So all of that is basically right here. You know, present that early. You know, when we are given some sort of conflict, when some sort of problem is put in front of us, we want to see it resolved. We want to see that thing come together ultimately. Like when we're watching the buddy comedy and we have come to care about seeing these two characters together and then they're pulled apart, we want to see them back together. When we're watching a romantic movie or something like that, where it's about how are these characters that we know are meant to be together, how are they going to end up with each other by the very end? That desire to see them come together at the very end, which can't come until the very end or else the movie's over, that's that tension that we're going to feel, which is the same tension that comes out of telling a joke, which is the same tension that you should be trying to build into your pitch. Ultimately, we should feel on the edge of our seat, waiting to see how that problem is going to be resolved, okay? I want to come back to emotions really quickly to talk about emotions and memory, okay? Think, like all of you, just take this thought experiment on for a moment, right? Think back to an important memory from your past, something that has stuck with you, right? It can be something happy, it can be something you're proud of, it can be something you're sad about or scared about. The earlier the memory, the better, right? Just think back to something like that. I know I'm thinking right now, and I can think back to, I think, my very first memory, and it's not a very detailed one, but it's from when I was like maybe 2.5 or 3 years old or something like that, right? So if you've got that in mind, the thing I want to ask you is that memory, you know, if it's important, it's probably connected to some emotion that you were feeling, like it's infused with some sort of emotion. Like my first memory, unfortunately, is a very scary memory, right? It's a nightmare that I had when I was that young. It's the very first thing I can remember, right? which maybe says a lot about my taste in movies and stuff like that. I don't know. But memories tend to lodge, or events tend to lodge in our long-term memory when it's accompanied by some sort of emotion, okay? And think about this. If you have an exec that you're pitching to, right? They may be the one exec that you're pitching to that day. But think about it from their angle. They're probably hearing dozens of pitches that day. They're probably reading dozens of scripts that week, watching dozens of movies that month, and ultimately dealing with all sorts of stories swirling around in their head, being thrown at them. What's going to make you stand out? What's going to make you memorable and remembered when you're up against a number of other people who are trying to get their attention? I think it's going to be the emotion, right? Because if you've pitched something to someone and you've made them laugh, or you've made them cry, or you've made them feel like they're on the edge of their seat, like they're scared or something, they're going to remember that. They're not going to remember beat for beat your plot. They're not going to remember the names of your characters. They won't. I'm not going to remember the names of any of your characters, even if I've read your script. It's too decontextualized, But I am going to remember that script made me feel something. The movie that, the client movie that I have that's premiering at TIP, I can remember exactly where I was when I was reading that, and I did not want to put it down because it made me feel something. It made my hair stand on end. It made my eyes water at times. It made me feel at least twice like I was getting punched in the gut. It stuck with me, and I knew that if I could get people to read that script, it would stick with them as well. And when you pitch something, you want to try to create that feeling too. Not necessarily those same exact feelings that I was talking about, but we've all been in situations where if we're picking up on the emotions that the person across from us is communicating to us, we're going to feel them too, right? And that allows us to remember. It's kind of like when you meet someone for the first time, or you go into a job interview or something like that. They're going to remember less the specific things you said and more how you made them feel. So do that when you're pitching. Do that when you're pitching, and if you're creating those emotions, you're making them feel good about you and good about your story, they're going to remember when someone asks at the end of the day, so which scripts do you want to read? Ooh, I want to read that one from the person that I couldn't stop laughing when I was talking to them. There have been times where I've requested scripts where I wasn't quite sure about some of these other elements, but the writer in the pitch was like so funny that I had to see if they could communicate that on the page. So I requested the script. But the same thing can happen if it's a drama, or if it's something, if it's like a horror story or a thriller or something like that. You can create those emotions. If you can show me you're a storyteller, I'm likely to request it. So, and really just a couple more things here. We'll go through these briefly. I want to talk about comps. We've all heard about comps, and, what is your movie like? Is your movie a comedy? Compare it to a couple comedies. Is your movie a thriller? Compare it to some thrillers, something like that. I want to talk specifically about a technique that I recommend to people, but use it wisely, okay? And this is using comps and cognitive dissonance, okay? So what I recommend people do is you want to find at least 2 movies that your script, or 2 television shows if it's a pilot, 2 projects, whatever it is, 2 known quantities that are out there that both resemble your script. Like, let's say this right here is your script, and this is one movie, and this is another movie. Both of these movies resemble your script, but both of these movies are very different from one another, okay? This is how, using this, you're going to be able to create that cognitive dissonance. And the best way I can explain it to you is by giving you an example. The example I like to use is this. Imagine, like, let's say I'm pitching something to you and I'm giving my comps as to what the movie is, and I say, you know, it's like The Little Mermaid. So one comp is The Little Mermaid, right? My movie is like The Little Mermaid meets the movie Seven, right? It's like Little Mermaid meets the movie Seven. And most people, and you know, I see that a little bit here. Most people, when they hear that for the first time, they're like, what? How in the hell could a movie be like Little Mermaid and Seven, right? That feeling that you're having right there, that kind of confusion, that like, wait, how is that possible? That is cognitive dissonance. That is you trying to resolve these two things that don't feel like they're related to one another at all. How can these possibly be in any way alike? That I've found has been very useful if you can find two things that work like that, because it creates an emotion, it creates engagement, it creates this question in someone's mind as to how did this writer do that? That sounds so original. That sounds familiar because I know those two movies, but it sounds original because the two of them are completely different from one another. It kind of hijacks their brains a little bit, and it wins you attention, it wins you engagement, it wins you points, right? I've used it to great effect in the past, but the thing I would warn you about is do not pick two examples. Like, those two examples may work well to create cognitive dissonance, but you're not doing yourself any favors if those two examples in themselves don't actually resemble your movie, right? Or if one of them does and the other one doesn't. You have to deliver on the promise of bringing those two things together for your premise. You deliver on the promise of your premise. And I will say, though, when I first brought up this example to people of like Little Mermaid meets Seven, I was just making something up off the top of my head. I was trying to think of two things that were like completely different from one another that I couldn't ever imagine seeing a movie of. But since I originally did that, I have seen a movie about killer mermaids come out, and I have also seen a television show about evil, dangerous killer mermaids coming out. It happens, you know? People want to see how you manage to accomplish this, right? People want to see this, and it engages their intrigue. Like, it intrigues them, engages them. You want them to say, basically, I've never seen that before. But at the same time that they're saying that, they are also saying, well, I know the movie The Little Mermaid, and I know Seven, and both of those movies did very well. So if this writer, if he or she could have found a way to bring those two things together, this must be a genius, you know? So use it, but use it wisely. Don't use it, don't just use it willy-nilly, you know? I know there's a better word than willy-nilly there, but, you know, I used it. So the last thing I want to talk about here before any questions that people may have is the importance of practice, okay? We have all heard about the importance of practice in any number of situations, in any number of, let me see here if I can see this. Hold on here. No. Well, I know someone's chatting something, but with this shared screen, I can't see what the chats are. So we've all talked about, or we've all heard about the importance of practice in the past. Like, practice makes perfect. Practice this, practice that. It's to the point where, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, I get it, Chris. Like, we need to practice. But I really don't think people do it enough. I really don't think that, at least the pitches that I hear oftentimes from people, I can tell that it's the first time they've delivered this pitch, or the first time they've delivered it under pressure, and they haven't practiced it out enough. The only way that someone can really get comfortable doing this is by putting themselves in situations where they do it over and over and they get feedback. The feedback is important because it's the only way you're going to really be able to know how to adjust, okay? So what I want to talk about briefly here is a couple different types of practice that I recommend that all give varying levels of feedback to them, right? And if you listen to feedback, you use it, you can improve. If you just practice something and you don't learn anything from it, you just kind of do it on autopilot or something, you're not going to get better at it. The only way that I feel comfortable doing these sorts of sessions in front of multiple people that I don't know, and look, I've been in these things at times where there are close to 100 people in these things, and it can be very nerve-wracking, I know, for some people who've never done that before and are thinking about that. The only way I feel comfortable with this is I've done it over and over and over again. And I don't know, there are probably some recordings out there of early webinars that I've done where I didn't quite know what I was doing, and I was trying to figure it out as I go, and I was very nervous about it, and I was stumbling all over the place. But over time, you get better at it. You get comfortable, and you can make the people who are listening to you more comfortable as a result as well, because you're just talking to them like a normal person. Anyway, different types of practice, different levels of feedback. One type of practice that you can do is practice in front of a mirror, right? And I recommend you try that, okay? Practice in front of a mirror, and you can see yourself, what you're doing. You can try to pick up on your tics. You can get some sort of feedback that's coming back to you saying, this is how I look when I pitch. Do I look nervous? Do I have these little tics and things like that? And it kind of puts you on the spot and makes you feel like someone's watching you, right? It makes you feel like what you're going to feel when someone is actually watching you when you're pitching to them, okay? But that only gives you so much feedback, because if you're, like reading something while you're pitching or you're delivering the pitch, it's such like you can't pause it. You can't stop and rewind it in the same way. You're not going to be able to pick up on everything. So the next higher level of practice and higher level of feedback that you can get from it, the next thing that you can do is record yourself. Put yourself on video. And I know how that feels to watch yourself on video. I don't like it. I don't think anybody, well, maybe some people like it, but even actors who are, like big actors there are a lot of them who don't want to watch their films. They don't want to see themselves on that. It's frustrating to them. It's scary. It's too much. They start second guessing everything that they do. But that's what you want if you're practicing, right? And you all can do this, because I know you all have cameras. We all, how are we all here, right? Record yourself on your phone. Record yourself on your computer. It used to be really hard to be able to pitch or to practice pitch like this, because we didn't have cameras everywhere. We didn't have ways to record ourselves. But now we do. So there is no excuse not to do it and not to benefit from it. Because what you can do then is, like when you're reading something into a mirror or pitching something into a mirror, it's real time, and you're not going to be able to separate yourself enough from, you can't separate yourself enough to give yourself more objective feedback. But when you've got a recording of yourself and you're watching it and you're not thinking in real time about what you're trying to say, you can pick up on everything that you could be doing better, right? You can pick up on those verbal tics, those physical tics, the way that you're not looking into the camera or whatever it may be. Or you can see, am I speaking too fast? Is it hard to follow me? Listen to that feedback. Use it. The next, and I think really the best type of feedback that you can do, better than a mirror, better than something that you're recording, is go and tell your story to an actual living, breathing human. Go and talk to a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, somebody, anybody that you can say hey, can I just have 5 minutes of your time to tell you about something that I'm working on? Okay? And this is an important and different kind of feedback that you're not going to be able to get from watching it or from analyzing yourself in a mirror, or really analyzing yourself in any way. Because you can see as you're pitching to someone else, are they following along? Are they losing attention? Are they looking at their watch? Are they getting anxious and wanting you to get to the point? Are they feeling are they actually feeling those emotions that I recommended that you get these people to feel? Are you making them laugh? Are you making them cry? Are you making them feel scared? You're not going to be able to get that by just watching yourself. You know, you need that real-time feedback from people to get the best, to get the best information that you can put to use. And you will feel what that sort of tension is like, and whether it's there or whether it's not there. So I do recommend you do that, and you will benefit from it. And yes, it will feel nerve-wracking, but you would rather get over those nerves and solve problems before it matters than wait to solve them until like after you've already done it and in a situation where it really does matter. The stakes are low when you're looking at a mirror or a video recording or talking to a friend, right? But if you've got this one chance to pitch to somebody that could possibly buy the script, wouldn't you want to put your best foot forward? I will tell you that I pitch on behalf of my clients all the time and on behalf of my company. I guarantee you we're practicing our pitches before we go out. If I've got a new client script that I've got to pitch out to a bunch of people, I'm practicing it pretty frequently with my business partner and with myself until we kind of really narrow it down into a form that we really like. And be open in all of your practicing to switching it up a little bit. Especially when you're pitching it to other people, see what they respond to and experiment with new ways that you can present something in the moment. That's where you're really going to find some magical moments in your pitch. All right, so that's practice. And then one last thing that you can do to practice. And one last, I guess, another thing on this practice thing here is when you are pitching to other people, just know it's impossible to please everybody. Not everyone's going to respond to your story. It's not the end of the world. There are movies that get great reviews or everyone seems to be following. I don't like all of them. It's impossible to please everybody. So please don't feel like you have to, and don't get discouraged if someone doesn't respond the way you hope that they do when you're pitching to it. It's a learning opportunity. And it's good for you to get used to people passing on things, because people are going to pass on things more than they're going to say yes. I deal with that all the time. It's just about pushing yourself further and further and further until you find the people that will respond to it. The last type of practice involves research, right? How you could research pitches and pitching in general, right? I think one way that you can get really good at pitching is by looking at examples of other great pitches that are out there. And when I say this to people, especially emerging writers, I see a lot of them perk up saying, oh, where can I go find examples of other pitches? Where is this magical resource? Are there a bunch of people out there like creating like a pitching database that I can go watch and take a look at? No. The answer here is maybe deceptively simple. Like, I encourage all of you to do this. Please go do this. Either tonight, after this is over, or tomorrow. Please, this is one of those things I said in the very beginning here. What you get out of this is what you're going to put into it. This is something where you're going to need to put something into it. Go to YouTube, right? Go to YouTube and type in best trailers of 2019. Type in best trailers of 2018, 2017, as far back as you want to go. What you're going to see are 1 to 2 minute pitches for entire 2-hour long movies. 1 to 2 minutes in which a story, like a shortened version of a story, has been presented that gets the audience of that thing to say, I want to go see that movie, right? This is the very highest level and like highest stakes level of pitching, because tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of people hours are on the line, all based on like 2 minutes as to whether you can convince someone to go see this movie, right? So this is pitching working at a very high level. And I encourage all of you to go look at these and look for those 4 elements that we were talking about, right? You're going to see that again and again and again in the best made trailers. But something to be careful about here is taking on, you know, like the types of trailers that you should be looking at. Like definitely look up best trailers, right? But I encourage you to take most of your tips and techniques from trailers that involve new stories that have never been seen before, or from new storytellers, not from people who've been doing this forever. Like if you watch a Christopher Nolan trailer, you know, you watch the trailer for Inception, or you watch the trailer for, what was it, Interstellar or Dunkirk, what the hell are those about? You know, you like watch it, really go watch the trailer for Inception just as a thought experiment and go and tell me what that movie's about based on that trailer. You can't tell, right? But all they have to do is flash Christopher Nolan's name on there and give a lot of cool visuals, and people will go in and buy it, right? Or go in and buy into it. They'll get in their cars, they'll drive down to the movie theater, they'll spend exorbitant ticket prices to go sit in a darkened room with a bunch of strangers for 2 hours based off of that short movie, or that short trailer. Don't look at the Christopher Nolan trailers. Don't even look at like the Steven Spielberg trailers, because those are sold on their names and their past reputations. Same thing with like Marvel trailers. They're being sold on the reputation of Marvel. Look for the trailers for movies where you're like, I've never heard this story before. I've never heard of this creator before. The best examples of those. And that's where you're going to see great pitching techniques right before your eyes. And there's a lot that you can take a look at. Is everything perfectly translatable to verbal pitching? No. But there are techniques that you can learn from. And I'm telling you, if you look for how are they creating emotion, how are they introducing us to a relatable protagonist, how are they how are they introducing us to this immersive setting, how are they showing us the problem that this movie resolves around that needs to be solved, and what sort of hints are they giving us about how we're going to feel or grow through this character as a result of this movie. You're going to see all these principles that we've talked about here in action there. You know, so research, practice, put in the work. This is how you're going to get better at pitching. And all of you can do it, because I've seen people go from honestly not knowing what the hell they're doing to getting really good and improving quite a bit. And I like to think of myself as an example of something like that, because I will tell you, like I gave you that story about how I came out here. When I first came out here and had to find a way to get my foot in the door, a little bit of that of not getting a job, I'm sure, was probably my fault, because I had no clue how to pitch myself. I had no clue what I was doing. Even when I did get that first job and I had to answer their phones, I was terrible on the phone. I was nervous. I was thinking too much. I was too in my head. I wasn't just there in the moment. And, like using a lot of these techniques that I've shared with you today. But since then, I've gotten to the point where I'm not perfect in no way, but I've gotten a lot better. And if I can do it, I know you can do it. You know, so put in the work, practice, and I know all of you have the ability to do well with this. So that's kind of what I've got for you. I'm open to questions, of course, here. I know this, I tend to ramble about things, but I like to give you, as much information to work with as possible so that you can benefit yourself here, So that's what I've got for you.
Cool. So we have April here to give an example pitch. So we'll let April do her example pitch and let you give a critique, and then we'll open it up to general Q&A about anything that was talked about or any other questions you guys have about pitching. So April just went through the pitch prep program 2 months ago?
Yeah, 2 months.
Yeah. So she's going to do the pitch that she developed in that program for you guys.
So this is still kind of like a pitch in progress, but hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Hey, April.
So I live in Northern California, and I'm a survivor and an adventurer. I survived a cancer diagnosis at 35. and I made a bucket list of 40 things I wanted to accomplish before I turned 40. So I spent the next 5 years building a career in financial tech while also kayaking the Maine salmon, swimming with dolphins, publishing 3 books on post-traumatic growth, and climbing Kilimanjaro. And the characters that I write are typically people who are relatable, who struggle with life's big questions, who bite off more than they can chew, and ultimately overcome adversity with tenacity and ingenuity. I would say that my style as a writer is somewhere between Marty Noxon and Abby Cohn. I write both features and television. And then my training includes the Roadmap Writers Career Writer Program. So that's me. Today I'm going to tell you about Jake is Fine, which is a 1-hour serialized TV pilot. It's in the genre of workplace drama with comedic elements. The logline is, when a demon visits their flailing startup with the offer of a lifetime, a software engineer and his disgruntled coworkers must choose between taking a golden parachute or saving their immortal souls. And the comps, for the purposes of tone, are Silicon Valley meets Lucifer in the vein of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, I want to start by saying what this show is really about is the 7 deadly sins. I wanted to explore these 7 deadly sins and also how human beings struggle with them. So season 1 is sloth, and it's set in corporate America because I have seen these 2 sides of sloth, apathy and passion, laziness and ambition, play out multiple times in this world. And I wanted to explore what would make somebody sell their soul. So even though I'm imagining the tone for Jake is Fine being like Buffy or Lucifer, where it's a drama with comedic elements, the concept for the series itself is sort of like American Horror Story, where every season has the same cast, but a different setting. So maybe season 2 is in a karate dojo in Reseda and the sin is wrath, or maybe it's gluttony set in a food truck in Las Vegas. So I was inspired to write this pilot when I was working at a software startup that was going through a transition. And it was being acquired by a corporation. I was seeing a lot of my coworkers exhibit these symptoms of workplace frustration, like lack of attention to personal hygiene, insisting that everything is fine when it's absolutely not, changes in personality. And as it turns out, these are also symptoms of demonic possession. So I started to imagine this engineer named Jake who, maybe isn't really ambitious and just wants to show up, do his job, go home. And what happens when this corporation comes in and this lack of ambition kind of bites him in the ass? Like everybody else is getting a golden parachute, but his bosses they've taken risks, they've been greedy, they're walking away with enough to retire on, but he's walking away with like a month of severance. And this is where our pilot starts, with Jake kind of realizing the bed that he's made in the midst of this acquisition. But what he doesn't know is that these golden parachutes were the result of deals that some of these higher-ups made with not the devil, but like an underling of an underling of an underling of the devil. And under that person is a demon named Rebecca. And she works in hell. She has a job just like Jake, but she's way more ambitious. She's not the kind of person who, is just going to come in, show up, collect her souls, and go back to hell. She wants to, sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought you said something. So she tries to get people to sell their souls because they don't want to have to work too hard or care too much. And in the pilot, she arrives at Jake's startup to collect these souls. She sees a lot of disgruntled people, Jake included, and they're ripe for the picking. And because she's the exact opposite of sloth, Rebecca decides, again, she's not just going to show up, get her accounts, and go back to hell. She's going to pick up a few souls on her way out the door, including Jake's, starting with Jake's. So in the pilot, we cover Jake's disillusionment, the environment that's going on at this company, this startup full of people who may or may not be willing to sell their soul for this golden parachute of a lifetime. And the idea is that over the first season of Jake is Fine, we see how Rebecca recruited some of these people. We see her try to recruit some new people. And we watch 2 of Jake's coworkers, Brian and Shayna, who are kind of like the Jim and Pam of this startup, figure out how to perform an exorcism, free Jake from Rebecca, and save the company from the terror that she brings. And by the end of the season, Rebecca's boss has gotten wind that she's sort of gone off the reservation, and he's impressed with her initiative, but he's not really pleased that there's this whole startup full of people in Boulder, Colorado, who know all about demons, who know that they're actively recruiting people to join the ranks in hell. And, you know, one of their coworkers is willing to trade their soul for a parking space with their name on it or a mini fridge in their corner office. So that is Jake is Fine. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. I guess I'll give you some feedback on that, because I think that's usually how these work.
Okay.
So I think first thing everyone should take note of is there's a good, and Dorian, that was good right there. So you saw a pitch there delivered in just over 5.5 minutes. So that's one thing, right? And April covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, right? And I don't think anyone walking away from this pitch is going to be confused as to like what the overall thing is about, right? I came away from that very clear. And I would say one thing that everyone should really pay attention to here, or have noticed, is how comfortable April was delivering this. You know, like it was to the point where like I wasn't focused on her delivery. I wasn't noticing, I wasn't noticing verbal tics or like she felt nervous or whatever. It was just like I could focus on what she was saying, not how she was saying it. Okay, right? And it felt very natural from her own unique voice, which, as you can see, is different from mine. It's going to be different from yours. So there's no ideal storytelling voice that you have to imitate there. So good stuff there. I did like particularly when you would say things like, here's the comp that it's like, or here's the, like it's based on the 7 deadly sins. I could like put the concept into my mind very quickly. If I were to give just a couple of bits of constructive feedback, right? I think your pitch could be even stronger if we can take it a little more out of the realm of the abstract and put it, and even the way I'm saying this is very abstract, right? But make it a bit more concrete, like it took a while before we got to the point where we see, oh, this is about Jake and what Jake is having to deal with, or Rebecca and what Rebecca is having to deal with, and the problems that they're like. Those concrete things, the quicker we can get into them, I think the better. And it just takes a long time to get to that in your pitch, because I think what you're doing is you're pitching more of the overall series and the concept of it too early, versus I think you want to hook us in with like, who do we care for and why do we care about them and what are they trying to do? Then afterwards give us, and then the series will be like this and we'll hook it onto something like that.
It's funny because I've gotten feedback on both ways. Like I've gotten feedback that, oh no, you should start with that. So I'm trying to find a mix of like,
I think, but
one line or something.
Yeah. So I think the way that you could like split the difference there is your comps early.
Okay.
And that, you can say something like this whole series is going to have to do with its 7 deadly sins. And the first season, and especially the first episode, is going to deal with sloth. And then you start talking about your characters and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But it's, like I think when we get too much into like, the structure of the series and the problems that we'll have to deal with and future things like this, at that point, I still don't know what it concretely is going to be like on the ground in the pilot episode,
Yeah.
But I think you're doing a lot of things very well here. I think it's just about, switching those things around a little bit to get it to its fullest potential,
This is the second time I've pitched it this way.
Okay.
But even now doing it, like I've practiced it a few times, but even now doing it, it did feel long. Like I was like, as I was saying it, I was like, I need to move these 3 sentences to the bottom.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. Just like what we were talking about earlier, like if you're just doing all, and I'm not saying you are doing this, April. I'm saying the general you to everyone. If any of you are just doing this in your head or just doing this out on paper, you're not gonna experience that feeling of like, oh wait, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. That's why you have to practice this stuff. You have to practice it in a way that you can get feedback from it. You know, and the more you do it and the more you switch it up and fine tune it, the better it's going to get, you know? So I think you're very well along with this because all the right pieces are there, April. It's just about moving them around in the way that's most effective. The hardest part, I think, is finding those initial pieces to begin with and what is really, you know, what really the pitch should just generally be about, you know, but you've already got that there. So now it's just fine tuning it.
So I do have one question.
Yeah.
Some questions I've gotten were, who's the protagonist? Is it Rebecca or Jake?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. And that's, I think, ask yourself who is the protagonist in the pilot episode, right? Who is the most important in the pilot episode? And I would encourage you to pick one person who is the most important, even if your story turns into an ensemble down the road. Like, and the example I use all the time to illustrate this is like look at the series Glow on Netflix, right? The overall series Glow, like when you watch, you know, later episodes and later seasons, it deals with a lot of different characters doing a lot of different things in all sorts of different places. But go back to that pilot episode and who is the main character? There's no question. Every single scene in that pilot episode is from Alison Brie's perspective. It's all from her. Go back and watch it again. If you don't believe me, or read the pilot, whatever it is. Go back and you'll see exactly what I mean there.
Cool.
So yeah, it's just about getting the audience to engage with it, and then over time you can expand them out into future, like different perspectives and things. You know.
Cool. Thanks for the feedback.
You're welcome.
Cool. Awesome job, April.
Thanks.
And now we'll open it up to Q&A. I think Jerry has a question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I echo pretty much what Chris was saying, is April, about what you were saying, and also that comment you meant about, you know, making, you know, who's the protagonist, that sort of thing. But one of the things that I was looking for, even though you stated, you know, what the sloth-like situation is for that gentleman, what did she? Can you give? You know, I think it would help to give an example of maybe what this Rebecca tries, you know, to get something, you know, to convince him to go over to the dark side. But maybe that doesn't work. Maybe she has to try it again. But just to give some indication of what actually is the thing that she tries, or, you know, because
like, would it be, Jerry? Would it be like making it more concrete, like some of those abstract things?
Exactly.
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Instead of just saying Rebecca recruits Jake. Yeah.
Maybe an
That's
example.
one of the things I want to flesh out a little more. Take another minute up.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
some of the things that she does is she kind of gives him a shoulder to cry on, and, you know, sort of highlights to him like how poorly he's been treated by his supervisors. She kind of encourages him to not care, gives him reasons to not care, because like the flip side of sloth isn't just like laziness, it's apathy. And it's like, why should you care, you know, in corporate America when nobody's like appreciating you for it?
Yeah, don't misunderstand. I liked it very much. It's just that I was looking for something like that.
That's good.
Cool. And I think, Jerry, you had a question too that you had put in the chat box if you want to ask that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Chris, you know, could you, and I'll read it basically because I forgot what I wrote. Could you please comment on how to best handle world building and immersive setting and plot character drive? I've heard that it's perhaps best to tie in bits and pieces of the immersive setting into the character drive, not all at once, but, you know, just slowly, so that, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, Look, if it's in a pitch, like this is one of the harder elements to get out there, and there's no one size fits all rule that's going to work in all instances, because in some, like if you watch I don't know, certain modern dramas, like I don't know, if I were to watch, what is it, Dead to Me, like the show Dead to Me on Netflix, the setting isn't, it's kind of there, but it's not that big of a character. Like you could get the setting out of the way, and it's like with very brief kind of comments on it, right? But if you're writing a show, if you're writing like Deadwood, for example, the setting is kind of a character there, right? And we need to spend a little more time with it. When it comes to like world building in the pitch, that's where, like, don't focus on that too much, because you could bog it down a little bit. Like if we're looking at like April's pitch, for example, you know, you could talk about like what I was talking, like I was world building for you when I was talking about what my life was like at a law firm. I was talking to you about how I felt in that law firm. I was talking to you about I had my own assistant. I had my blah, blah, blah. There's a little bit of world building there that gave some examples that were like, oh, I can place that in my mind. It was like, it was in Washington, D.C. It was in a big city. It had hundreds of lawyers. Like I didn't go on and on and on and on and on about it. I gave you enough that you could paint a picture in your head, right? So that's what I would say about the immersive setting. Did you have another comment, or not comment, but another question about, was there another part to that? I felt like there was another part to that question, like character related or something.
Not really. No, I mean, the main reason I mentioned that this was the fact that I've noticed that if you spend too much time with the world building, that the whole plot just slows down.
So here's the thing to do, and this is what you should do even in your script. World building comes through context. I know that sounds very abstract, but like, okay, if I'm like, think about your normal daily routine when you get up in the morning, get yourself ready for your day, right? We all have something we do every single morning, right? We all have multiple things we do every single morning. But what if we did this on a spaceship? How slightly different would that be? You know, you can give us the context of the world through some normal thing that people do usually. You know, like in my world, in our world on the spaceship, when we get up in the morning and eat our breakfast, we eat it through a tube. That's different. That's world building, but it's hooked onto a common experience that you have as a human, which is eating breakfast, right? Does that make sense? Where it's like, that's how you're going to get the world out there. What you should not be doing in your scripts or in your pitches is like going on and on about the world's like this, and then we've got this going on, and this. Let the world unfold itself through the experience of the character. If you want to see something done what I think done very well world building wise, through just watching characters work their way through the world and you get the context, watch Mad Max Fury Road, okay? The latest Mad Max, the one that has Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron in it. There's a little bit of voiceover in the beginning, a little bit, but not too much, right? And what the scenes do, like, there's not a lot of dialogue in these early scenes, like explaining what's going on, but you get the context. You're like, oh, they do blood transfusions by, you know, having people, like live people, have things hooked into them that are basically like blood slaves to them. They're that's one really graphic example, but there are lots of different things that come through by just seeing the character work their way through the world and not having someone just stop you in your tracks and say, okay, in our world, we do this, and in our world, we don't do that. I see that happen in a lot of scripts, though, where people bog things down with putting exposition into their characters' mouths to explain the overall sense of the world. You know? Imagine, like, look at what happened with Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She's in a completely different world, and we learn the rules of that world as we walk through it with her. We don't have someone just explain every single thing to her the minute she opens the door. You know? Like, she has to learn. And that's part of the joy of watching a movie that has a world built around it very well, is we learn it through the experience of the character. Don't do the thing that I see way too many emerging writers do, having people around you explain the rules of the world to them in a very bland way. Does that make sense? Anything else? Sorry, I get very passionate about these things. I don't mean to attack anybody. I just get excited. But you should get excited too, like with, not about me, but like get excited when you're pitching things and talking about things. Like this is your opportunity to, you know, share the thing you poured your blood, sweat, and tears to other people. You know, you are the expert of your story. You know, you're like, what made you excited to sit down and write this thing for days, weeks, months, or years? Like that's what you want to tap into. You tap into that passion, and that is another thing that will be contagious emotion wise, you know?
Yeah. Thanks as always, Chris. I appreciate it.
Of course. Anything else? Anybody? Any questions? It's fine if nothing, but yeah, April?
So one thing that we learned in the career writer program is how to do a writer bio. I've worried that mine's like a little too long, but I'm not, and I don't know, I'm not sure if you could, what was your feedback on it?
Okay, so I'm in the minority here, and I know that people will disagree with me on this, and that's fine. Everyone's going to want something slightly different, so we can always only give some generalities and some general rules. I think the more important thing to do when you're verbally pitching is to pitch your story, right? I'm less, honestly, I know it sounds terrible, but when I'm hearing a bunch of pitches from people, I'm less interested in their personal story than I am the story that they've written that they're pitching to me.
That's good feedback.
The difference here, where I think there is a way to like split the difference between the perspective of people saying, always give your bio, versus me who says, don't give me your bio unless I ask for it. The difference there is if there was some reason that you and your individual experience that could give me a little bit about your bio, fed into why you wrote this story, but not in a way that feels like artificially constructed, doesn't feel forced. It's like, you know, I don't know, has some demon tempted you to like, you know, slothfully do it, like this happened to me, so I wrote about it. I might want to recommend you to a mental health professional if you're literally saying that. But if there's some other thing, you know, that like related to your story, you know, then I could see tying your bio into the story that you're telling us, because it would feel very personal to you. Does that make sense?
Like in my written, I mentioned that like I worked in financial tech for 8 years. I've been through a bunch of corporate acquisitions. I feel like that is the bio that I should put before this.
I would pull a little bit more specifics out of that though, because when if I or someone else just hear those words and be like, what does this have anything to do? Like you would want to say like, I have been in this environment where it felt like people had their souls taken from them.
Like they sold it for a parking space.
Like they were possessed. I felt like blah, blah, blah. And that's like, ooh, wow, that would get me interested in your specific experience related to this. That's taking it from abstract words like I've been through acquisitions and downsizing, different things like that, to here is a concrete situation that I have experienced that made me feel something that directly relates to this story I'm going to tell you about.
Okay.
You know?
Cool. Thanks.
You got it. Nothing else? Nobody? All right. Here if you want it. Okay. I guess we're good, Dorian. Nobody has any questions.
I don't know. Darren looks like he has a question.
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting is the creating emotions in a pitch, and specifically when I'm pitching horror. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about eliciting like the emotion of fear when you're, you know, eliciting like a 5-minute long pitch, and horror is very visual and, you know, tension or release. And I'm like trying to figure out how I best construct.
Have you ever looked up things like like if you look up online, like 2-sentence horror stories, or like stories that are written
Right.
out in a paragraph, stories that can make you feel something in a couple words, you know, like that's, I can't give you a rule that's going to work in every instance, but
Right.
I recommend you look at some examples like that. Like there was a thing that it's not horror, but the same concept applies, right? Like there's a, I don't know if it's true or not, but there's an apocryphal story about, I think, Ernest Hemingway. I think it's Ernest Hemingway, where he's in a bar being interviewed by a reporter, and he, in his Ernest Hemingway sort of way, is boastfully saying to this reporter, I can write a story in 6 words and make you feel something. And this reporter is like, you're going to give me 6 words and make me feel something. Take me on an emotional journey. Like that's what you're going to do? And he says, yeah, I can do that. And the reporter is very skeptical and says to him, you know, well, he says, that sounds like BS. Sorry, I'm watching my language a little bit here. He says, and Ernest Hemingway says, yeah, like if I can do it, then, or if I can't do it, I'll buy drinks for the whole bar. But if I can, then you buy drinks for the whole bar. And the reporter's like, okay. So Ernest Hemingway takes a napkin, takes a pen, and he writes down 6 words, and he hands the napkin over to the reporter. Porter, like, you know, unfolds it, takes a look at it, puts it down, and immediately goes over and buys drinks for the whole bar. And apparently what was said on this napkin, I don't know if I blew it up too much or whatever, but the words on this napkin were, it was 3 sentences, 2 words each. And it said baby shoes. Second sentence said for sale. And the third sentence said never worn. You know? So it's about how you set it up and how you pay it off, right? You can make people feel things, and you can make them feel all sorts of different colors of emotions, right? So look at how they do it in these different, like, you know, short horror stories, you know? Look at, I don't know, I think there's a lot of good stuff that went on in the Haunting of Hill House, you know? A lot of even like monologues in there were, I think, done particularly well that could create like tension and emotion and things like that. There's I don't want to tell this story. It's too weird. But there's a story that there's a story. No, I'm not even going to get into it. But it's a horror. Just look up horror stories like that to get yourself in the mindset of how certain things like that can be done, and you will start to sense, oh, maybe that's a moment I could take out of this. Like think of different setups in your story that are terrifying and introduce us to what those are, you know? Look at a horror movie that works very well for you and try to break down how you could describe that scene very briefly and get a similar emotional effect. You know, like it's all going to come through practice like that. And that's what all of you should be doing anyway with your writing. It's just like I said, take a look for pitching, take a look at trailers, but also for your own benefit as a writer, go out there and rewatch some of your favorite movies and ask yourself, how did it get me to feel this? How did it get me to feel that? And how could I briefly pitch a scene like that would make someone feel that exact thing? And the more you practice that, the better you will get at it. And I'm sorry I can't give always do this, and here is the 1, 2, 3 step structure that's always going to make it work like that. I don't think it works that way. And I think if you put yourself in that mindset too much, I know it's easy. I know it sounds easy. I know it's what everyone wants to hear. But if you force yourself into that sort of mind frame, you're going to miss those magical opportunities that come out when you're willing to experiment on your own and you're truly learning something on your own. You know? Mike? Mike had a question. Oh, I hope that answered it, Darren. Is that good? Okay. Mike?
Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. So, recently I wrote a short story that was like deeply personal, and it's pretty horrific. And the whole point was to actually write something that was horrific. You know, basically write something that was just emotion. And I found that when I was writing it, the first draft was story, the second draft was character, and then the third and the fourth draft were sound and color. And I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about sound and color in your scripts. Like if that even when you see a script that comes across your desk, is sound and color even a consideration? Because I seem to put a lot of it in there.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a copy of like a first year film student like copying Kurosawa and shit like that. But I mean, it just seems that like there should be colors associated things, there should be sounds associated things, such like that.
Yeah.
Do you even look at that? Is that even something that's even considered?
So, I mean, look, I think some of this comes back to how different people experience stories, right? And I've read I've read from the perspective of a lot of different creative types out here and business types. I've seen how directors respond to scripts, how actors, producers, executives, agents, managers, financiers. I've seen how all these different people read and respond to scripts. Actors will very often focus, like they take forever to read scripts, and not just because they're lazy, but it's because like when they're actually sitting down to read a script, like they're playing with the words in their mouths basically as they're reading this stuff in a way that I don't think any, finance-based producer is going to do, right? Because they just read them slightly differently. A director is going to read a script through a different mindset than an actor or producer, especially an agent will. An agent, for the most part, is going to be looking for what is that hook? Because what is that hook that I can use to convince someone to read it and pitch it very quickly? Like that's what they're looking for, right? All these people look for different things. So it sounds like you may be looking at your writing and your scripts and things from the perspective of how a director would look at it. If you're really looking at sound and color and you're, like referencing Kurosawa and things like that, like a director will look at a script in a very specific way, but you have to remember when you're pitching something, you're probably not pitching it directly to a director, right? You're probably pitching it to a financier. And if you are deciding that you're pitching something that you are attached to direct, which is a tough road, but if, I wish you all the best if that's what you're attempting to do. It's like, I want to, attach myself to direct this. I don't know that it's that important pitching it to really pull out like the colors or how certain things would sound. What will happen often when a producer or an executive is reading a script, because they also look at things very differently. That's why they're not directors, they're producers, they're not directors. They're producers, they're not actors. They're producers, they're not writers, right? They're going to read scripts in a way where, like, what are their goals? How can I sell this to an audience? How can I sell this up the chain to my financiers and to my superiors? How can I sell this to a director? They're thinking more on those lines and less about what are the colors going to look like? What are the sounds going to be? Like, I think that's something that once a director comes into play, one, they're going to appreciate, like some of them will greatly appreciate that kind of vision has been put on the page, but there also will be some directors there who will want to just be able to bring their own vision to it. So it's a delicate balance you have to find there when you're writing it and when you're pitching it. When you're writing it, you don't want to overwrite it, right? Because if you overwrite it and you put too much of this is how the movie has to look and this is how the camera angles have to pan to this, that's too much. it will annoy some directors, and it will also, like, the more you call attention to the fact that, like, we're reading a movie script, like if they have to focus on how something's going to pan or how the voiceover is going to track or whatever it is, the person reading it has to stop and separate themselves from the story to envision how that's going to work.
Good.
So the less, it's just like calling attention in the pitch to how you're pitching it versus what you're pitching, you know? So these are my loose thoughts about that question. And look, I know some people are, especially creatives, writers, and any other type of creative, you're much more likely to experience different types of synesthesia, to where like color and sound and words are like so important and tied up together that in no way would I want to encourage you to gut that out of what you're writing. But I would say when you're pitching, I don't think you need to get too deeply into that stuff. You know?
Yeah, it totally. In the pitching, I would try to avoid it. I think it's more of like a, in creating in like writing the story. I keep, because there's 1,000 different ways to do this thing. So I keep approaching it 1,000 different ways. And the latest one is, you tell a story like, okay, I got a story. This thing happened to me. Okay, well, write that. Okay, that thing's happened to me. And then look at the characters. Who are the people involved?
Mm-hmm.
It was me and my brother. Okay.
Yep.
And then I was like, well, then you got to get to the emotion. And I was like, but how do you get to the emotion? Well, the emotions all sound and color, because you can't say Dave cried. No, Dave's, you explain that it's the sound and the color that makes the emotion to me.
Yeah, I hear you. And so, yes, I think there's definitely some of that. I would also say when you're thinking of how to create emotion, I think you're highlighting something that's very important here, that everyone should be aware of here too. Creating emotion in the audience or in the reader is not about asking them to watch someone cry, right? Sorry, I shouldn't be using I'll use my politician finger here. To not be about watching them cry or watching them be happy or watching them do this. What it is it should be about putting them in that experience, in the shoes of that person, so that when the event happens that makes the character cry, the audience is going to feel sad too, right? It goes back to this like setting up and paying off. You set up expectations, where we want to see something happen. We want to see something happen so badly, and we're getting to the point where, it looks like it's going to happen, and then you take a sharp left turn and don't give us what we expect is going to happen. We, the audience, we're going to feel something when that happens. We won't have to watch someone cry because we're going to be crying ourselves. We won't have to watch someone laugh because we'll be laughing ourselves. That's how... so there's a big difference there between showing characters crying, showing characters happy. That's not what it's about. And sometimes when I give notes back to people, that's what comes back to me. It's like, well, you told me to put emotion in it, so I made everyone cry. It's like, I like that you took the note, but let's rework how you're addressing it, So just there are lots of different ways to skin the cat, Mike. I think setup and payoff is what I would encourage more in the pitches, and I would even encourage make sure you've got it in the script too. By all means, use your own unique visual style with your writing, but make sure that the setups and the payoffs are coming in there too.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else? All right. Cool. Well, I hope it's been helpful. And, everyone, like I said in the beginning, you get out of this what you put into it. So please don't let this be the last time you think about pitching, or that you prepare for pitching, or that you even do research on pitching. Like, take it on yourself to take this just as seriously as someone who's going to be listening to your pitches is taking it, right? Because I'm out here working every day to support myself and pitch things and build my clients. Like, this isn't a hobby to me, So take it seriously. improve wherever you can, and share your passions with us, and you'll do great things.
All right, cool, awesome. Great words of inspiration there to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Chris. This was excellent as usual.
Thank
and
you.
we'll see everybody real soon. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.